So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our bite-sized session on the role of nutrition in preventing and treating pressure ulcers. So my name is Lauren Fisher. I'm a community dietitian, and I'm joined today by Nikki Fernandez, who's the dietitian on the Oxfordshire Stroke Rehabilitation Unit. So, just a bit of a summary, I suppose, of what we're going to cover today. So we'll start off looking at the nutritional risk factors for developing a pressure ulcer, and then move on to kind of how we identify those who are at nutritional risk, talking briefly about the MUST tool, which you may have heard of before. We'll then move on to looking at the dietary management of undernutrition, and then the dietary management of overnutrition, and then finish off with kind of an activity where hopefully we can put into practice some of what we've talked about today. So just to say, as we're going through the presentation, if you have any questions, please do put these in the chat, and we'll monitor the chat throughout the session, but aim to answer the questions at the end. And you're more than welcome to keep your cameras on, but it was just to say, if you could please mute yourselves, just so we don't get any feedback. Oh, you're on mute, Nikki.
Did that because I was coughing. Thanks, Lauren. So the first thing we need to look at is the identification and assessment of pressure sores from a nutritional perspective. And we know that there are many links that or factors that are linked to this from a nutrition perspective. So low body mass index, malnutrition, unintentional weight loss, obesity, which in itself is a separate risk factor, nutritional deficiencies, and an impaired ability to eat and drink independently. So we know those are the risk factors, and these can all be considered in part of the screening tool, which is the MUST, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. So it's a validated tool which you can use in the community as well as in the inpatient setting, and anyone can and should be doing it if you're a trained member of the healthcare team. So typically as an inpatient, you'd do it on admission and then weekly, and then in the community, you'd screen on first contact and then repeat as needed. So if someone you had concerns about, you might do it weekly or monthly, but then usually it's 3 monthly for those who are pretty stable. But not in detail because we have a separate bite-sized training on this, and there's a link at the bottom if you want to look into that in more detail. But essentially the three main factors that we're looking at to determine the risk of malnutrition and therefore the risk of developing pressure sores or prevention of healing of pressure sores are in 3 steps. So the first one's looking at BMI. So the lower the BMI, the higher the score would be. Then step 2 is looking at unintentional weight loss within the last 3 to 6 months. And again, the greater the percentage in weight loss, the higher the score. And then finally, looking at someone's ability to eat and drink in the next 5 days. And that could be impacted on with infection, swallow concerns, or just being acutely unwell. You then add those 3 scores, and there's a maximum of 6, and that will give you a low, medium, or high risk. And those things will determine your risk of developing pressure sores and the ability to heal. So I think the next stage is acting, and I'll hand over to Lauren.
Yeah, so once you've kind of identified someone's at nutritional risk, we need to act on that. So firstly, kind of running through some of the key macronutrients that we need to take into account when thinking about preventing and treating pressure ulcers. So the first one being energy. So guidelines recommend an intake of between 24 and 35 calories per kilogram per day. And this is because, we need enough calories to prevent protein being used as an energy source. And the name of that process is gluconeogenesis. Carbohydrates are a major source of energy for our bodies because they're broken down into glucose. And you can find these in things such as bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, oats. So, your starchy carbohydrates, they're a fantastic source of energy for us. So next, thinking about protein. So guidelines recommend between 1.25 and 1.5 grams per kilogram per day. And this is the same whether someone's at risk of developing a pressure ulcer or whether they actually have a pressure ulcer. And protein's, really important macronutrient for this because we need it to synthesize, maintain, and repair body tissues. But it's important to note that in order to use protein properly, it needs to be included as part of a balanced diet. So there's no point just having, you know, loads of protein in the diet, but not enough of the other nutrients that we need, because we won't be able to use it properly. And some key dietary sources of protein are things such as beans, pulses, fish, eggs, meat, and dairy products. And the guidance is to kind of include a portion at each mealtime. So that's kind of around a palm size. So it could be a palm size of chicken, meat, or fish, or you know, a provision of around 20 to 30 grams of protein. That would be a portion. So moving on to fluid. So the recommendations for fluid are between 30 to 35 mils per kilogram, but this is dependent on the age of the patient. They might be on a fluid restriction as well, so that's something else to take into account. And while that's kind of a more prescriptive kind of recommendation, general guidance is around 6 to 8 cups a day, so that's always kind of a good starting point with fluid. And I suppose it's worth noting, you know, if there's quite a lot of fluid loss from the wound, from the pressure ulcer, that might be putting the patient at risk of dehydration. So that's really important. That's why it's really important to make sure they've got enough fluid. And I suppose what counts towards someone's fluid intake? So things, obviously water, tea, coffee, fruit juice, milk, and soup, which you may not have initially thought of, but soup does count as well towards fluid intake. And then thinking about some of the key micronutrients. So firstly, zinc, which is involved in kind of cell proliferation and metabolism of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So those macronutrients we've already talked about. And some of the key dietary sources are things like meat, shellfish, dairy products, breads and cereals. And then thinking about iron, which is involved in collagen formation and the transport of oxygen and nutrients to our tissues. So some of the animal protein sources of iron are things like red meat, fish, and poultry. But then kind of our plant-based sources of iron are things like pulses, legumes, dark green vegetables, nuts, and seeds. And then lastly, vitamin C, which is involved in collagen synthesis. And we can get that from things such as peppers, potatoes, green vegetables, citrus fruits, strawberries, and blackcurrants. So that's just an idea there of, you know, some of the key micronutrients to be thinking about.
Thank you. So we've kind of covered the proportions of your macro and micronutrients, but I appreciate both on the ward and in the community settings, you're not going to necessarily have access to be weighing out and measuring all of those components. But we've got a national pictorial view, which is the Eat Well guide, which some of you might have seen previously. But it just gives a nice indication when you're thinking visually about the proportions of these food groups that you should incorporate. So for example, 1/3 should be coming from your starchy carbohydrates, excuse me, so potatoes, bread, and cereals. 1/3 should be your fruit, vegetable, and salad group. And then 1/6 from your protein sources, so meat, fish, and plant-based. Just under that for your dairy products, and that can include plant-based options which are fortified. And then a small section for your fats and oils. And then outside of that, of course, you can still incorporate foods minimally that are more highly processed and those that are higher in salt, sugar, and fat. And then, as Lauren said, the importance of fluids. So in the top right hand corner, about 6 to 8 glasses is what you're looking for good hydration. Then we've got this information sheet. So there's a series of these that have recently been developed by the BOB, so the Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire group. And we've got a link to all of these at the end of this presentation, so you can access them later. But it's a really nice way of summarising the key things that are important in nutrition, in preventing and helping healing with pressure sores. So we'll talk about the risk factors at the very top, and then your treatment plan and what you're hoping to achieve, the protein intake that you're aiming for. And it's also got a nice table which talks about visually, again, and weight as far as grams, about the protein that's involved in certain amounts of foods. It would talk about incorporating those factors into your diet, and then some of the key other nutrients that Lauren has discussed, which are key for wound healing. So moving on, so we know that those are the main components, but what do we do if your patient is underweight or has lost weight? And one of the first things we recommend is adding, a practical thing is to add 1 pint of whole milk per day. And you can incorporate this by adding a little bit more in your cereals, into cooking, by making a nourishing drink, so whether that's a homemade milkshake, a malted drink, or hot chocolate. And you can also fortify it further by adding milk powder to the milk. And of course, there are dairy-free alternatives such as soy, but we just want to make sure that they're fortified so you're getting sufficient iron and calcium as well. And to give you an example of how you can make one of those milkshakes, this is taken from one of the Bob information sheets as well. You can take 180 mils of full-fat milk, add 4 tablespoons of milk powder, and it can be supermarket own or Marvel. And then to add flavour as well as some vitamins and minerals, you can add 4 teaspoons of milkshake powder. And again, there are lots of varieties, making sure you blend it well, either with a fork or a shaker. And that can be made up to about 320 calories and about 19 grams of protein. And if you want to further enrich it, you can add some double cream, whipped cream, or even ice cream or some drizzles on top.
Thank you, Nikki. So another kind of component of this food first approach that we'd use to kind of help someone who's underweight or has lost weight unintentionally would be to include some high energy and high protein snacks between their meals. So I've got some examples here. So things like peanut butter or cheese on toast, a handful of nuts and seeds, and perhaps some rice pudding, and you can fortify that further by adding jam and cream to the rice pudding. Other ideas might be kind of a full fat, perhaps Greek style yogurt with fruit, hummus with breadsticks, and eggs are another good snack as well. Another excellent kind of source of protein. So I've got a fried egg there, but it could be kind of a boiled egg, or eggs on toast. That's another good snack idea. So we kind of encourage perhaps having one mid-morning and one mid-afternoon. So so you're encouraging the patient to kind of have a regular opportunities to increase their nutritional intake. This is another one of the Bob resources that's been that's newly produced. So this is a protein-rich snacks resource. So it's got lots of different ideas there of different things that you can buy from the supermarket, and it tells you the calorie and protein content. Yeah, I guess we're showing you these resources so you know kind of what's available and what you can share with your patients. But yeah, I think that's a really good range of things there that you can be suggesting. And then I suppose the last component of this food first approach is about fortifying foods to add additional calories and protein. So the purpose of this, I suppose, is using everyday ingredients that we can kind of add to a meal perhaps that the patient's already having to increase their energy and protein intake, but they don't necessarily need to eat a greater volume of food. So it just means that every mouthful is a little bit more nutritious. And that's kind of the aim of this. So some things could be the fortified milk. So what Nikki talked about earlier, adding the milk powder to the whole milk. Milk powder itself could be added to things like yogurts and soups. Grated cheese, adding that on top of meals, perhaps having some full fat yogurt with a dessert. So you can sprinkle things like ground nuts and seeds onto porridge. Nut butter is a really good fortifier, really good kind of source of calories. Double cream and avocado. So those are just some ideas there. But we have got this sheet here, which summarizes all of that really nicely for you. So it goes through each of the steps that we've just talked about. It's a 2-page spread, which is really nice. It's got some more snack ideas there, some more food fortification ideas as well. So yes, and as Nikki said, the links to these will be available at the end of the presentation. So we thought it'd be worth including kind of some of the considerations with a food first approach. So it's all kind of very well us telling you these ideas, but what if it's not actually practical for the patient? So you may need to consider what their food and fluid intake's like at the moment. If it's quite poor, you might kind of have limited scope to, they've got poor appetite, there may be limited scope to kind of increase their food intake by adding in snacks and things like that. So you may be focusing more on fortifying the food that they're already having. You need to consider who's going to prepare the nourishing drinks, the fortified foods and the snacks. So can the patient do this themselves? Do they have a carer or family member or friend who can help them to do this? And I suppose, can they physically buy the food? Can they afford, I suppose, financial considerations around buying some of the things that we've suggested, the extra food for snacks and things like that. Do they have any swallowing difficulties? So if they're on a texture modified diet, or if they need thickened drinks. So that's something also to bear in mind. And I suppose also the presence of comorbidities. So if your patient's got type 2 diabetes, perhaps focusing on fortifying with fats rather than adding sugars. So things like probably steering away from adding jam, honey to food, and perhaps focusing more on kind of the dairy products like the whole milk, the milk powder, etc. And I suppose if they've got renal disease as well, and I suppose with a patient who's got CKD, so chronic kidney disease, but they need kind of increased protein needs, I guess it's thinking about what stage of kidney disease they're at, and that will kind of help to guide your approach.
Thank you. So we've gone through a food first approach, which is what we should be doing with everyone, regardless of their situation. But we can use prescribed nutritional supplements as well. We do not offer these as first line to prevent a pressure sore if someone's intake is adequate, and we don't use it to treat pressure sores either if someone's nutritional intake is adequate, because we'd be looking at other ways of enriching their diet to be doing that. But they are a very useful source, and we can rely on them, and we do rely on them for those where we aren't able to get enough through food first, or practically if they're unable to make up some of their drinks, or they don't have carers or visitors to see them in between those meal times, then they can be a very useful way of ensuring that people get their additional nutrition of their micro and macronutrients. So we do have certain ones that we need to use in the community first of all, and this has been guided by the Bob formulary as well. So first one is always the powdered supplements, and we've just got a picture of a couple of those. So the Ames Shake Powder and the New Ultra Food Link Complete, and these are both made up with milk, again, either with a fork or using one of the shakers. And then second line is going to be the ready to drink supplements. And we've got an example of the New Ultra and the Nutrition 40 Sip to give a couple of examples where Abbott is no longer the first ready-made drink that we would be using in community. So moving away from those who are either underweight or have lost weight, we also need to consider patients who are at risk of pressure sores, who are living with obesity or being overweight. And this, like I said before, is a separate risk factor for developing pressure sores. So the focus is still to make sure that they're having a healthy, balanced diet based on the Eat Well plate, and they need adequate energy to prevent breakdown of their pressure sores and improve healing. But the focus here is going to be more of an increased protein and micronutrient composition with a moderate calorie intake, so we're not promoting further weight gain. So ways of doing that are still to have your regular balanced meals, but to choose foods and snacks which are lower energy but higher protein, such as a high protein yogurt, boiled egg, those which have a lower fat of rice pudding and custard, and then having milky drinks made with semi-skimmed milk or skimmed milk, because they still have a really good protein profile, even if the overall fat and energy is slightly lower. And then looking at lower fat cheese with crackers, for example. And again, when you are having drinks, to choose those which are sugar-free.
So we thought we'd conclude our bite-sized session today with a bit of an activity. So this is what we put together as kind of a normal diet, and what I suppose we're wondering if you could help us out with is how we could fortify this diet to increase the energy and protein content. So I thought maybe we could give you kind of a minute or a couple of minutes to maybe put some ideas in the chat, or if you want to put your hands up, that's fine as well. But it'd be good to kind of hear what you think about how we could increase the energy and protein content of this menu. So yeah, should we say kind of a minute, maybe, perhaps?
Lovely. I can see someone's put full fat milk. Brilliant. Adding cream, nuts, seeds, and honey or fruit to the porridge made with whole milk. Perfect. Yeah, someone said to the breakfast add milk powder and cream. Milk powder to the mash in the soup, full fat spread, double cream or ice cream to the milk powder. Lunch, someone's written to add butter on the bread. nut butter. Someone said to add in some snacks, add grated cheese to the soup and nut butter on the bread, lovely. And 2 slices of bread, fantastic, if we can increase that. Dinner, high-fat yogurt. Sort of, we've covered each of the meals. See if any more comes in. Yep, adding cream, cheese to the mash. Full-fat milk, double cream, milk powder and syrup. Yep, adding butter to the carrots. High-fat yogurt, perfect.
Excellent. Shall I go on to the next slide so we can see what those are all fantastic ideas. This is kind of what we came up with. So I think, as some of you have said, so perhaps using fortified milk with the porridge and putting some fresh fruit, ground nuts and honey on top. I think someone also said as well about including some snacks. That was a really good kind of gap that was in their diet already, where we had an opportunity to increase their nutritional intake. So perhaps something like some nuts, a slice of peanut butter on toast. They could have, you know, one of those homemade milkshakes perhaps in the afternoon. Looking at their lunch, so yeah, we thought about perhaps adding some skim milk powder, cheese, butter, double cream to the soup, obviously giving it a good mix to make sure it's not lumpy. And then yeah, so with the bread, perhaps if they could have another slice of bread with their soup, and topping it with some butter, so avoiding the low fat spreads, and or perhaps something like cream cheese. And then dinner, so a beef stew, we thought you could add, you know, some double cream to the stew while it's cooking, perhaps top it with some grated cheese. To mashed potato, you can add milk powder, fortified milk, cheese, butter, double cream. I think someone mentioned the carrots, melting some butter on top. That's a great idea. Also perhaps or instead you could use olive oil as well. And then yeah, choosing a full fat yogurt for pudding rather than a low fat yogurt. And then lastly, with the bedtime snack, so they were having the hot chocolate with semi-skim milk. So we'd recommend perhaps using the fortified milk. And then, as Nikki mentioned, you can add things like whipped cream, marshmallows on top, maybe some drizzle to really increase the energy content further. So this is the.
Someone just got their hand up, Lauren.
Oh, sorry.
They had Sophie. Yeah, I didn't know whether to interrupt your flow, Lauren.
Sorry.
Sophie,
no.
do you want to ask? We're almost coming to the end anyway, but
I can wait.
Sure, we're just going to go through resources. Do you want to do that little bit, and we can move on to questions?
I was adding it to the chat actually, but I just wanted to ask. So I have obviously, when you have frail patients who obviously are undernourished, I have suggested a lot of the things that you've highlighted, but if they've been advised to be on a low fat diet because of other illnesses or you know, risk of stroke, etc., is that something that we need to be considering when we're suggesting this? Or if we're at this level, actually is the skin condition more important than the actual other conditions that the patient may have?
I take that, Lauren. I mean, you look at the patient as a whole, and it is a really good question. So it's about weighing up the short and the long-term risks and benefits of using these really high calorie foods, whether it's high in sugar or fat. So if I'm thinking very short term, if someone's got a pressure sore that needs healing, in the short term, these foods will not push someone into having heart disease or weight gain for diabetes, but they would long-term contribute to that risk factor. However, you're right, if someone is already on a ward with a stroke and you want secondary prevention, you look at it as a whole by looking at their lipid profile, their weight, their pressure sore risk, and see if you can incorporate other more healthy options which aren't so high in sugar and fat. And you could do that by, I know on some of our information sheets we had things like hummus or avocado. These have a really, really high fat but really good profile of fats, and they're a really excellent way of getting energy dense foods in. And then looking at lower fat but higher protein sources. So the lower fat cheese or the milk powder has still got a really good protein intake, but the saturated fat and calorie intake is lower. So it's getting that balance. And sometimes, unfortunately, you can't always achieve the energy or the fat and protein that you need without leaning on some of the more unhealthy foods. So we do rely on them in those instances. I don't know if that's helpful.
That is helpful, thank you.
No problem.
So this last slide is just about resources. So we've linked a few things here that we think you might find helpful. So the first one being the British Dietetic Association's food fact sheets. So there's lots of different topics on there, and they're all kind of patient friendly, so they can be printed out and given out to patients. There's one specifically on the prevention and management of pressure injuries, which is quite a good one, and kind of goes through some of the things that we've talked about today. Similarly, the Bob resources, so we mentioned earlier the one on wound care nutrition. We've also touched on the Food First resource and the high protein snacks. So those are all available. These should all be links, so you should be able to click on them now. And there's also ones for nourishing milky drinks and nourishing fruity drinks. So there's lots of different resources there, which are all brand new and really good. And then the last one being the Bapen Must calculator. So it kind of does it all for you in terms of calculating someone's must score. So it's quite, a good resource, that one, the calculator. And so to conclude then, we'd invite any questions, and thank you very much for joining us for this bite-sized training session.
Thank you. I think we've had some questions in the chat, but I'll go to people, I think, with their hands up first, and then I can go through. So I think, Veronica, you've got your hand up.
Yes, hello. I was just looking at this example of your menu, and basically, although it's high in fat and protein, there's any fiber, there's no vegetable, hardly any vegetable if you qualify potatoes. So why we're not encouraging patients to eat more basically vegetables and some fruits? And there's lots of milk in yogurt, in milk, and then some snacks, cheese, protein, absolutely, but there's no fiber, so they will end up in other issues. And that's my question, basically. I don't see this diet to be very digestible.
Should we bring up the example? So oh yeah, there it is. So you're right, we perhaps need more fruits and vegetables in there, but as far as soluble fibre, we've got that in the porridge at breakfast, and then if we're adding the brown nuts, that will also have a really high fibre and good protein and fat profile. The same as in the mid-morning snack, we've got toast, so if we make that whole meal, that would have a high fibre content, again with the peanut butter and nuts. You're right, for the lunch we haven't got any snacks or fruit, so you're absolutely right, we can add those in. That would give it a much more balanced profile. And again, in the evening we should be adding in, you're right, portions of fruit and veg. Do you want to add anything to that, Lauren?
I don't think so. No, I agree with what you said. Sorry, Dawn, do you have something to add to this?
Just to add as well, I mean, in terms of satiety and patients' appetite, often these patients are obviously having quite small portions, and that's, on the basis of still using the Eat Well guide. That's the beauty of that guide. Those ratios, depending on the size of plate, still remain the same. And the problem is that a lot of high fibre food, is very low energy dense. So again, it's trying to prioritise. So it's making sure that you are getting the micronutrients, and that's where sometimes if a diet is might require additional supplements in terms of a vitamin and mineral supplement that would be prescribed as well. So just to add that.
Thanks, Dawn. Nikki, did you want to say something or to ask a question?
I was just about to say what Dawn was going to say, actually, but because of the the satiety level of fibre. It is challenging when someone's got a really poor appetite, but that's why things like dried fruit and nuts are very useful, because they're not too filling. You can get a good concentration of fibre in things like dried fruit if the patients are able to swallow it. Okay. Right.
Thank you. And I think we had a couple of questions in the chat. I think the first one was just, are we going to share it? And we will be. It's been recorded, and I think that would be on the Bitesize section of the intranet. I think there was something about care agencies. Gabrielle, I wonder if care agencies do training like this with their staff, as they're often involved in food preparation for people in their own homes. It should be standard training for them, really. Does anyone know if they get this sort of training? That might be to the group. I know lots of care homes have a standard, they'll make their own milkshakes and fortify meals, but I think Dawn's going to come in. You might know more on this, Dawn.
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, there is no dietetic input to the care homes, as you're probably aware, but it is something that we're working on alongside with the care home support services. So we provide some basic written information, which will include a lot of this food first and food fortification advice. But I mean, it is a gap, and but hopefully by having the Bob documentation and having that sort of obviously across county-wide, so there's consistency of the information that's being shared, hopefully that message will get through, and for those patients in their own home, again, they will have that same information and those resources. Because I think one of the things, going back to the must scoring in patients' homes, it's really sort of so what is the action from that? And I think it's making sure that those, any healthcare professional, whether it's CTS or DNs, actually have access to that information and can share that fairly promptly within their visit, because they've got 101 other things to be doing, but to actually really sort of raise the profile and give that additional resource to the patients and the carers.
Gabrielle, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was just to sort of come back on that, really. Yeah, that's great, Dawn. And I really think when we're looking at the care agencies that provide domiciliary care into people's homes, community staff, I know district nursing, it often feels like you can give the fortification advice and you can give the leaflet to the patient, but they might not be buying their own food. They might not be prepping their own food. And you can contact family members to go through it with them as well. But you sort of feel like you don't have so much control over the actual person making the food. So I'm thinking this should be part of domiciliary care agency training, and perhaps you and I can catch up with Dawn, and part of the delegated healthcare work we're talking about standard care tasks and training for carers, and I'm wondering whether we can check with them there, whether this is in and use some of the work you're using with sort of care homes with care agencies as well.
Yeah, no, it's a good point.
I do think the Bob leaflets are very nice. And are we thinking about replacing those with the Oxford Health Fortifying Food, that very sort of simple leaflet? But that's one we use at the current time in district nursing. But we would probably go over to these Bob leaflets now, do you think?
That is the plan, and I think that needs to be communicated out. And I think, because I think I may be incorrect in saying, but I think they go back to about 2015, 2017, and I think these are very nicely illustrated. I think it's really good to have that pictorial element as well. It's just really, really easy to use. So yes, it's a good point, yeah, Gabby, and I think we need to work out how we're going to communicate that out.
We can work on that. I definitely think they look more comprehensive and updated, and yeah, that'd be good. Thanks.
Yasmin, I can see you've got your hands up for a question.
Yes, it's just to ask on top of what's just been said there by Dawn and the other lady. Sorry, I don't know your name. Gabriella. That I work with, I'm a learning disability nurse. I work with patients who quite often get care coming in for half an hour, 3/4 an hour. Meals aren't getting made from scratch anymore. I'm trying to encourage that in staff that are 24/7, or certainly have a whole day. I'm asking them to follow making a meal from scratch, and that obviously includes the client engaging in that as well, to give them a good activity. But then also the ones that are just coming in and bunging a meal in the microwave, are there any guidelines on more nutritious ready meals, rather than just making things from scratch as well for these patients, either because they're low weight or obesity, that and their wound care needing support, that they actually use better, healthier ready meals.
Yeah, this is a real challenge. You're not wrong. We do have many people who are reliant on ready meals because if their care package doesn't provide time for them to do food prep. As far as I'm aware, we don't recommend any particular one item, but we would, if we're seeing someone in community, particularly if they're a particular group, we would be providing individual advice as to the types of ones that they should go for. But we also have other options like Wiltshire Farm Foods, Oak House, so they have more labelling involved, whether it's for texture, healthy eating, lower salt ones. So they are an additional option which can be useful, and there are other companies as well that will do home deliveries or freezer, or even the dried options now, which can but not always would have a better nutritional profile. So it's just exploring that with each patient depending on their package and their nutritional needs.
Thank you.
And I think it's worth remembering, if I may just interject as well, I mean, not all ready-made meals are bad. So sometimes, you know, you can make sensible choices. And yes, OK, from a palatability point of view, often they are higher in fat or higher in sugar. But, you know, if that's actually the only option, and that's the difference between getting, you know, a hot meal versus not a lot, then again, we have to wait. So we might not be able to get to the ideal, but, you know, it is something for a lot of people. I mean, you know, a lot of people, you know, they don't have an ability to cook. So you can, you know, if you're not making a meal, you don't have that skill set necessarily to be able to fortify, let alone actually cook the meal. So I think it's sort of using them as an adjunct where possible, and with the other suggestions Nikki's just made. Go ahead, Gabby.
Just thinking about who makes a decision about where the food source is coming for carers to prep in the home. I mean, often it's families that set them up. So I guess we could discuss with families like what we're using and suggest. But
yeah, I think it has to be a joint.
Yeah, it does. But I'm just thinking, for a lot of patients, is it the family? Is the care agency, social services setting it up? I'm not sure how much influence we've got over there, but it does go back to the care, again, the carers getting educated right at the start, doesn't it, to know about this stuff?
I think it's a joint. I think it's Rob who's written here, joint care plans based on patient rather than the service. So I would agree. So obviously some patients might not be in a position to make decisions, but we still need to be considering. We can give them all the healthy eating, high protein advice in the world, but actually if they don't want to do it, we have to respect that. So long as they understand why that advice has been given, they might opt not to follow that advice. So I think whoever's buying or providing the food or the meals, we have to be having that discussion with them. If they're not in a position to have any input, then yes, a healthcare professional needs to be giving some advice to the care team. Any more questions from anyone?
Put one in the chat.
Oh, okay.
It was there's a lot of sugar sometimes in the milkshakes, to the point that I don't actually give them to my children. So does this matter? It's particularly for diabetics, or is it the amount that you're giving them so little that actually it's insignificant?
It very much depends on the type of milkshake and the frequency. So I think we'd always rather people meet their nutritional needs with food alone without relying on high sugar, high fat drinks. But as Dawn said, sometimes we're not in that privileged position, and they're a really useful way in a short period of time to provide someone with that they need. For people with diabetes, again, we'd look individually to see what their blood glucose control are. So it might be that if they're insulin dependent, we might need additional checking and to adjust their insulin regime with the support of someone who can do that in that short period of time when you need it. Or you look at options which aren't so high in sugar, if you're in a position to be able to do that. So there are drinks available which aren't as high in sugar and have more of a higher fat protein profile. So again, it's just about exploring that.
Okay. Thanks.
Someone's got their hand up. Penny, was that you or is yeah?
It's Penny.
It's not a question, it's more of a thanks really, for the session. You know, we know in TV just how important a role nutrition plays in the prevention and management of pressure damage, and we try and sort of spread the word as part of our referrals, but you know, it is second only to the removal in importance. So it's kind of more important than, you know, skincare, management of incontinence and the like, which is one of the reasons why we really wanted to have your expert advice and to highlight it on this sort of National Stop the Pressure Day. It's one of the key 5 things in the skin bundle that we use, looking at the surface, skin inspection, keep moving, incontinence and moisture, and nutrition. And it's just a shame that N is the last letter in skin, because it would be great if it was the sort of first or at least the second letter in it, but it just isn't spelt that way. So thank you so much for your session to help us sort of like highlighting that really.
Not at all. Thank you for listening.
And hopefully you'll be happy for us to steal this video and put it on our website.
Absolutely. I can see more hands up now though. Does anyone have any other questions or comments? Gabrielle? Or is this
I just wanted to back up what Penny's saying there. So I now lead the trust-wide pressure damage prevention group in the last few months, and this has come up through that pressure damage prevention group as being an area that we don't concentrate on as much as we should, and probably is going to have the biggest impact on reducing pressure damage with our patients in the trust, because the other things are more well covered, if you know what I mean, and people perhaps forget the nutritional aspect, which is why we're going to make nutrition the cornerstone, well, the focus of our pressure damage prevention strategy going forward in the next year, because that's something different and it's something that we haven't tried before, and we think it'll make a real difference. So this session today is literally to launch off that new strategy, really, the first thing to get people thinking about it more. It'd be great to share the recording. Absolutely. I know there's many district nurses who wanted to come and are going to listen to the recording, and also the actual slides. I'm wondering if you could furnish us with those, because that will be really helpful for getting the message out as well. And we'll be changing our documents over to the Bob ones that you've mentioned today, for example, and doing some meetings throughout the district nursing service. And it's not just district nursing, of course it's not. And on the trust-wide group, there's representatives from all services who have patients that are prone to pressure damage traditionally. But district nursing does look after the majority of people with pressure damage in the community, and also reports the most pressure damage, and our biggest incident with lapses of care is around pressure damage, although it's a tiny percentage that does affect, but it's still our most significant harm to patients. So that's why I've sort of focused quite heavily on district nursing, just because it's the biggest sort of service affected really. But thank you so much for doing this. It's been a great launch off for our new strategy around pressure damage, and we're going to build on this now going through. And Dawn attends the pressure damage group, don't you? So, and others here. So, you know, we'll make sure this continues. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.
No worries.